Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the Next Reel family of shows on True Story FM. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
It is Pete Wright.
On today's episode, we have invited producer-writer Josh Hyams to talk about John Carpenter's The Thing, a movie he likes. Josh is a BAFTA and Emmy-winning producer and writer whose most recent film, Mr. Burton, received a BAFTA nomination for Outstanding British Film and is now available in the U.S. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
A delightful hyphenate you are, Josh. Writer, producer, and yet you're coming to us from what is quite obviously your music studio. What's going on with your life?
I know. I'm a frustrated musician, awfully frustrated, and there's something in me that still thinks maybe one day it will happen. Yeah. And I kind of have to accept that I sort of fell into doing films. I love doing films. But I always feel like I am a musician in disguise. Sometimes people might say very heavily in disguise. But no, I love making music. And actually, it plays into the thing which we'll talk about later because,
for sure,
John Carpenter, who has become a big, people really love his soundtracks now. Maybe they didn't exactly at the time, but
and he's performing on the road too. So
I know a touring musician, John Carpenter. Yeah. Also impressive. Fell into filmmaking.
Exactly. Probably because, as he would say, the thing was a complete failure. And I'm sure he's done okay, getting money on the road as a musician is the way to do it now because can't sell any records. And the thing was a dud, so maybe he's still making up for not making money on the thing.
Right, exactly. Still trying. Yeah. Well, let's talk about you and your career, how you got started. As somebody who was a frustrated musician who kind of fell into film, what was that fall like? How did you kind of land in this industry?
Well, I have always loved film, but it kind of, a bit like Mr. Burton, which we might go and, hopefully talk about a bit. I wasn't exactly a kid from nowhere. I mean, it happens more in America perhaps than it does in England, but people do come from all over America, which is a very big country. But I didn't know anyone that did film as much as I loved it, really loved it, because I was a kind of a VHS horror film kid, the 80s, and really just started to really love film through, films like the one we'll talk about later and others, and horror and special effects, and then got into more serious film. And it was a pretty good time for film, but I didn't really see it as a potential career path because I didn't know anyone that did it or how to do it or what anyone did on it. I mean, I'm still trying to work out what a producer does, but I definitely didn't know any. I did an English degree. I was always doing music. I still do music, and kind of had the dream about being in the band and being the sort of rock singer. Again, partly probably why I like The Thing is a few years after watching The Thing, I started getting into the music of the Doors, and Kurt Russell does has that sort of Poet's Beard era Jim Morrison thing going on. Yeah, it kind of ties in. But I got a work experience job. A friend had done a work experience placement, and I managed to get a work experience placement at Working Title, which is one of the, obviously one of the big production companies. And
not a bad gig.
Yeah, and it was a good place to be. And actually, it just so happened that Nikki, who works on the desk at Working Title, and people would phone, "Have you had any runners come through recently that are okay?" And Revolution Films happened to phone after I'd done a few weeks there, and Nikki recommended me, and I got the job at Revolution with Michael Winterbottom and Andrew Eaton and Melissa Parmenter, and really it kind of took off from there. And I, in a way, maybe it not being my complete and total dream helped in the way to build a career around something that I just kind of there wasn't as much pressure, or I probably should have felt pressure at the time, but I probably didn't feel the pressure. I just enjoyed doing it and enjoyed the collaborativeness of it. A little bit, it is a bit like putting a band together, working on a film and, just really seeing how films worked and really, I'm still working with Revolution. We just made another series of The Trip and Michael. And so I've really, been there from boy to man, and they can't shake me off. And it's great working with people you know and like. There's it's important to the more you make things, the more you think, well, you try and assemble the band out of people that you like the way they play music, or you know what I mean. There is an equivalence there, that if you're thinking, okay, I need to put a group of people together, you don't necessarily choose the person who's the absolute best at their job, the best in the field, which is probably how I've managed to stumble into working, because I enjoyed working with people. I enjoyed being there. They obviously detected that I was pleased to be there. I'm still pleased to be there, and I've been lucky on the things I've worked on. I think that's the other important thing. I mean, it's funny working. I did love films like the one we're talking about. Kind of big, bold, effectsy things. But the Michael Winsbottom, who I've worked with a lot, he made films in a completely different way, in a kind of verite way, and he was really exploring that kind of digital cinema thing, and making it real, making it feel real, both in terms of the film and also the way you make the film. And that kind of brought out a whole side of filmmaking and types of filmmaking that that I'm really into. And unfortunately, the audience is still undecided sometimes. But anyway, you can never be sure. But
hey man, I feel like that is classically British diminishing of your accomplishments. I mean, we have this rule around here, around our particular house, that, if it's over 6 stars on IMDb, it is imminently watchable. Like it's just there's a window under 6 stars and over 2 stars that's largely unwatchable. And I mean, there's nothing you've done that people don't like above and beyond that marker, and that is a crazy accomplishment in this industry, right? You have a string of very delightful projects.
Thank you very much, and that is important. You want audiences to like it. I've probably not worked on the sort of smash hit that obviously you kind of want to work on. That just kind of catches the wave that somehow really is zeitgeisty. So I've worked on great films, which I love and have won awards and, all kinds of things. But I still hanker after that one that just catches fire and really, but you can't really plan for that, can you? If you could, do it. It's exactly magic. There is a magic thing that you search for, where the stars align. But thank you for noticing the IMDb scores. But I did work on one of the first things I worked on, and you won't know this you won't have heard of it. It's called Sex Lives of the Potato Men, and I was a runner driver on that. And it must have been a slow news week, but this film, which starred Mackenzie Crook, actually, who is now making his own TV. He was in The Office and things like that. He was in it, and a British comedian called Johnny Vegas, and it was quite funny, but it had got money from the National Lottery Fund, the BFI as it is now. And I think someone just noticed that the lottery had given, the British people had essentially subsidised this film. And it became a news story about it being the worst film of all time. Is this what we put our money to? So I have actually worked on something that, slightly unkindly, I think, was completely vilified as one of the worst films ever made.
You know what? I'll give you absolute credit for that. Sex Lives of the Potato Man is in IMDb, and I just hadn't had that window expanded. Yes. And it, in fact, is the lone 4.7 in the No Man's.
That's impressive.
Right.
Solid 4. We'll take that 4.7. I think that's
there you go.
Because the critics were definitely. I think people may have watched it out of interest and been like, "That wasn't so bad." You know what I mean? It can have the opposite effect. You kind of want to watch terrible movies because you're kind of interested in them, which like The Room or something like that. But I think actually it is. I would say we'd take that IMDb rating. But I wasn't responsible for it. But I did have I put in the work. I suppose that's one thing I should say, that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't expect to be a producer. I kind of wanted to learn how to do it. And, and I did start, well, I suppose a lot of people do, but I didn't have any leg up. I started as a runner and just kind of kept going. With a literary back, they sort of like books and literature and things like that. So
Sure.
that's the kind of writery part. So the more that side of producing.
Yeah. Well, when you're working on the variety of projects that you have, like the things like The Trip with Michael Winterbottom versus some of the more narrative types of projects, like, are you finding, as somebody who's produced, who writes, who's helped develop projects, are you able to kind of pull things from one type of project to use in the other? Is that something that you're finding
Definitely.
a skill at?
On set, I would say yes, because Michael, again, not to talk about him too much over the course of this thing, but inevitably I've worked with him a lot. He does show that there's no right way of making a film when you're on set. And sometimes the right way is makes it more impersonal. Like if the crew is too big, if every actor goes back to their trailer and just, waits around, if you spend hours lighting a shot, the momentum of a project, it can just be really sapping and exhausting, especially actually now. I've worked on inevitably been working on a lot of TV series as well of late,
Sure.
even though I love film, and they can stretch on for months. And if you're making it in that way, it's a bit of a painstaking, boring process. And the way Michael shoots is the camera is turning, a lot of the 8 hours continuous day that he likes to work. You don't have trailers for actors. You don't shout action or cut. We don't have slates, clapperboards. And you do just put people, and, even if a big star walks into that, they kind of get that, enjoy. And you have a very small crew. You have as few people as you can possibly get away with having. And I just think people can enjoy that experience more. Where you just strip away some of the stuff and some of the people and some of the slack times in a day, and you can make films more affordably, number one, but you can also make them more enjoyable, which I do like to try and do.
Yeah.
It's important to try and have some amount of fun, along the way, and I think that helps the vibe of the production. So yeah, definitely. From that point of view, in terms of the actual on set, you're always thinking, having worked in that way, if you turn up to a set with too many cars, too many trailers, too many generators humming away, it just feels so artificial and just slow. And that's not to say some films completely require that. But a lot of the time, and available light is the other thing Michael likes to do. It's not dogma-esque aesthetic. So trying not to waste too much time perfectly lighting shots. But it just depends on the material, doesn't it? And the budget and everything else. But it's worth knowing that there are ways of making a film, that don't require the big.
Massive scale. How do your editors enjoy the no slates?
Oh my God, Andy! I was just going to say that. My mind is ringing right now.
Yeah, no continuity person either, and sometimes two cameras. But the answer to that actually is kind of an interesting one. Like, first of all, it's digital, so you're not, when I started. And actually, you can see it in the thing. It's just the film stock is perfectly chosen for the material. They've really thought about the stock and the reels, and obviously these days you don't need to worry about the actual fit shooting on film. If you're digital. But the answer actually is Michael also edits in the office in Revolution Films, and just takes a bit longer over it. So there's not that. Pressure of like hiring a cutting room, and actually the editors, again, a little bit like other people, and it's kind of an open plan office. I remember one editor arriving in the first few days. She's like, I don't know how I'm going to work like this, with this amount of material, and also the way like people are just making coffees and chatting over there. How can I? And then in the end, she was like, I think this has been my favorite job to cut, because you feel like you're part of it. And actually, as when I was there working as a like in the office, you feel part of making the film in that. So but it takes a bit more time. It is true, but that's, and Michael, he started in editing, so he kind of takes a lot of that. But I don't think it's
right.
and you just want people to obviously watch it, and they have to watch all the material and mark it, and you'll have to ask the editors how they feel about it. They seem happy.
Okay. Yeah, right.
They're telling you, the producer, that everything's okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally,
we'll take that.
I mean, it's fine.
Yeah,
No, again,
good. Everything's great.
We work with the same people, the same victims. I mean, the same brilliant.
And they keep coming back.
And we made this film called Tristram Shandy, which was, Cock and Bull Story is what it finally was called, but it's based on a book called Tristram Shandy. And the joke of that book is this man trying to write his autobiography. It's an 18th century book. It's supposed to be an unfilmable book because basically the central joke is he's trying to write the story of his life, but it takes him a year to write a day or a week of his life. So he's like, at that rate, he will never finish. And it's kind of impossible. He's still playing around with his early childhood, when it's 400 or 500 pages in, and that it's kind of played for laughs, or 18th century laughs. And actually, when we were making the film, we were shooting so much, it felt like the editors it would never be possible for the editors to actually sit through all the material. It sort of reflected the way the book was. Look, there's a way of doing it, and there is a naturalism to it, and people respond to not being told, not worrying about continuity. Not worrying about the clappable. And now let's act. It's like it's not, and there's no action. It's just we're turning, sound speed. You do all that, and it's more. I suppose it is more documentary-like. Yeah, but that's not to say Michael doesn't do fine filmmaking. Like The Killer Inside Me which I didn't particularly work on much actually. It's one of the films I was doing something else, but that is a really beautifully made, period piece, very stylized. It's you can still produce, films, that have style and look beautiful, and it's about finding the people that can do it in that environment, I suppose.
There is such an interesting. I want to dive in a little bit to what feeds you about being a producer, and I specifically want to talk about this in contrast to, or maybe context of, Mr. Burton, which we will transition to. You are a self-admitted VHS kid growing up watching movies. What is it that had you land in a position of producer and not a more, let's say, hands-on crafty role, and not behind camera, you know what I mean?
I think it was just the words thing. That's just seemed to be what I was better at. Photography, I still struggle a little bit with, I've got quite a nice Sony camera now, and I'm still struggling with, frame rates and ISO and all that. It's not naturally what I kind of know about.
There's definitely people who intuit that kind of language.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Technically into it. And special effects, I really wanted to do up till a certain age. I was kind of obsessed with like Tom Savini and all. The Thing obviously comes out of that. But I think at a certain point, I realised that you kind of do need to be a good artist to do that, or sculptor. Particularly if you're working in 3D, or makeup is obviously a kind of form of painting and shadows and light. And although I'm not awful, I just, it wasn't really my natural. I kind of realised that possibly I would never be able to sculpt this amazing monster mask, that I kind of dreamt about. It just wasn't the way I really thought. And going through kind of English degree. But I suppose it was through development, through thinking. I do quite like the script. I like researching. I like researching periods and looking into, the backstories of things, and whether it's a real. I've obviously done quite a lot of real stories where you've got people to talk to and books to read, and reading around stuff. I just naturally did and enjoyed doing, and it just, I suppose, producing is the job you do when you're not talented enough to do any of the crafting. is that what I think I'm finally saying? Yeah.
Well, and I also don't think that's fair. I'm actually curious what it is about producing. What is the natural sort of skill that you feel like you've nurtured over the last 20 plus years in doing this role? Because we know production is incredibly important, right? We know this role is incredibly important. What is it that sort of feeds your soul? What makes you get up in the morning?
I think I do like working with people. I like, it is a wonderful, I suppose part of the VHS kid in me is like when you work, and I think people, when you're at a dinner party and you say what you do, people are just, interested in what we do as filmmakers because you can sort of point to that thing on the shelf, although there aren't any shelves anymore and there's no thing. But you can say, I made this, and it has some tangible form. And I suppose there is a real sense of achievement of being involved with something, at the beginning, just in a small way, and now, a little bit more, and actually getting some of my own ideas over the line, I suppose. And then people, I do like working with people, again, a bit like being in a band or something. I do like, bringing people together on set and solving problems. And, some problems require, we're all wondering about where we are on the spectrum these days in terms of ADHD and things like that. And producing's a kind of interesting mix of things, because some things you have to think quite long and deeply about. But then a lot of things on filmmaking is just kind of little problems that just crop up that you have to, kind of whack-a-mole style problems that you just have to think about and solve. And I suppose it suits I can't tell if I've got a mixture of good focus and then, kind of quite like loads of different things to worry about rather than just one thing. But, like the producing, there's different forms of producing, and fundamentally, I suppose the older I get, and because I've come out of it as more of a hands-on, on-the-ground producer in the trenches, which I love doing. But, there's a dimension of producing that I'm still trying to understand, which is how to get the money, which some would say is the hardest and the main
my
frame.
Next question, how do you feel about, showing for dollars?
Yeah, it's different. That is a side of it. To be fair, I often work with people that have solved some of those problems before I step on, or I'm working with people that can solve those problems, and we work. And some producers don't like being on set as much, and I've had producer partnerships which I quite enjoy, where I want to become the complete producer, but I think in a way it's about getting the money. It's always helpful if the last thing you did has done okay, really.
Sure.
That's it.
Yeah.
Can you get the actor that might make the difference, and more than, is the budget, is it can you do it at the right budget? It's all of those things. Unfortunately there's no science or magic to it. It's and there's no I wish there was. It's hard to always get money from the same source. Like Mr. Burton, for example, a lot of that money was because of the Welsh setting, which is is a kind of region, and they there was a lot of goodwill for that to happen. If it had been and you kind of just have to hope for the right collision of subject matter and talent and funding sources and
Well, I just had a personal shout out. My dad's a Cardiff grad, and
cool.
So it feels like it was just really nice to see Cardiff represented.
It's a proper Welsh movie, and I'm proud of that. I mean, I'm a Jewish kid from Essex, which is East London, and I have no. I didn't really understand Wales, but I knew I loved this story. And you find people that suit. You just try and find collaborators along the way that will help. Increase your chances of getting it made. And each film's like that has to have that journey.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk more about Mr. Burton and dig into this a little bit. This is the story of Richard Jenkins before he became Richard Burton, the actor we all love and adore, and his relationship with school teacher Philip Burton, who became a mentor and legal guardian. This is a story that you conceived and then you co-wrote it and produced this. So as somebody who kind of like came up with this story, like what was your draw to Richard Burton in telling this particular story?
Funnily enough, it comes from the two words. The answer is actually Rob Brydon, and Rob is a comedian, a comic actor, and it's him and Steve Coogan that are in the trip. Rob, along with Michael Sheen, who I've been lucky enough to work with, and Anthony Hopkins, who I haven't been lucky enough to work with, and Richard Burton, all came from this particular part of Wales, and it's just up the coast from Cardiff, and it's kind of out on the coast, and it's kind of Nowheresville, really. It's a mining, sort of inland. There's mining, coal mining, and then there's a steel mill that you see in the film that, billowing smoke. And anyway, so Rob is also an impressionist in the way the trip relies quite a lot on Steve and Rob doing these impressions. And one impression Rob would always do when the camera was turning, and a lot of the time when the camera wasn't turning, was this voice. This voice, he would often do "To Begin at the Beginning," which is Richard Burton doing Dylan Thomas under Milk Wood. And, after about 2 or 3 series, I just, when you're interested in something, and I just started watching some Richard Burton. And I love, again, I mentioned Jim Morrison already once, and Kurt Russell, who's in The Thing drinking whiskey. They were, and with the sort of the age I am in terms of being a musician, I do like Hellraisers, and I was lucky enough to work with Peter O'Toole, who was a hell-raising actor. It felt like this breed of men, in a way literature had it with Hemingway. And anyway, the English actors, probably because it was seen as a slightly effeminate thing to do, made up for it by drinking and womanizing. And, there's legendary stories of that. So I had that idea of who Burton was in my mind. And then the voice, Rob doing the voice, which it is, and then listening to Richard Burton, it is this most amazing instrument. It's the most amazing voice. It's rich, it crackles, it cuts through. It is a completely amazing instrument for delivering poetry, particularly, and lines. And then, the look of him, he did, and I then read a biography, and again, like musicians, like, many you can mention, David Bowie and other people, they weren't born with that name. To find out that Richard Burton was born Richie Jenkins, and had this, any person that has a stage name, they have this duality to them.
Sure.
There was this split in their personality, and so that was interesting. I was immediately interested. I didn't realize his father. He had his real father, this drunk, womanizing miner, and then he had this surrogate father figure, Philip Burton, who represented these different impulses. And I'm going to talk about The Doors again. Oh my God! I like movies that lead you onto other things. I suppose I like music that leads you onto other things. And some music, like The Doors, led me onto like Nietzsche and philosophy and Aldous Huxley and things like that. It's a gateway to other stuff. And one thing in Nietzsche is this thing about the Dionysian and the Apollonian. And I maybe didn't think of that straight away, but really, you have the Dionysus part of you that wants to kind of get drunk and party, and then the Apollonian, which is about order and like art and like making things just so. And it felt like Richard Burton had these two father figures that really just they kind of made him great. They made him greater than he would have been otherwise. But it also kind of pulled him apart. It was the tectonic plates of like where he kind of fell apart a bit, and alcoholism and these things, and then the Welshness, but then giving up his voice then became this. He was like a Frankenstein's monster slightly. It's a Pygmalion story because this voice was created by this teacher, and it became a bit like every expat or someone, a Welsh person that lives elsewhere. Richard Burton was more Welsh than the Welsh in a way because he had left. But he had to give something away in order to leave, and that was make his voice more English, make his name more English, sort of appear to be pretty much English. And that probably tugged at him as well, and he was aware that he'd had to give up something of himself and pretend to be something he wasn't to get famous. So it just felt like it was all there. And then the actual thing that made me realise where this story could go to, again, being someone who did A-level English and then beyond, Shakespeare has this character of Hal, who's in Henry IV, and then becomes the king in Henry V, and he's a good king because he has he's been in the taverns with Falstaff. He's this father of the taverns, really. He's like Hal messes around with this older big man who helps him drink and have fun. But then he knows he has to become the king. He's the king. His father wants him to grow up and take responsibility, and it feels like he, as a king, he's seen as a good king because he was able to interact with people in taverns. He was able to interact with people with court. He'd seen both sides, and it felt like, and because Richard Burton's defining role, at least on stage, before his career really kicked in as an actor, he appeared as Hal in Henry IV, and it felt like, okay, we could tell this story, from for this particular window of time that showed him becoming famous, and how how his rise from it's just so improbable, his journey to stardom, and beyond where our film goes. I mean, he was one of the biggest stars of the last century, and people can't quite remember that now, if you're below a certain age, but the level of fame he had with Elizabeth Taylor, it was something that hadn't been seen before. He dined with the Kennedys and Sinatra, and his star was, he just flew up into the orbit. And so it's kind of, how does this young kid go from that to that? And also, I love English teachers, and so and people that give back to work, and also working class kids, giving them access, the mentor figure. Giving a working class kid. Sorry, I'm going on. You've started me off now, but it's all of those things. I kind of saw all of those things in that story, that bit of this person's life, and it felt like it wasn't just about Richard Burton. It was a more universal story of a kid that shouldn't be in the arts. Apart from, he's got this talent, and this talent would go to waste unless this person recognized this talent and helped nurture it. And those people are really important to celebrate, I think.
Absolutely.
How'd you know? I've got so much I want to ask about this movie, because first of all, it's a banger. Like, I got so much joy out of watching this movie. I can't even tell you. I'm also a deep sucker for great teachers on film, and this one was outstanding. Toby Jones is fantastic. Harry Lowry is a treasure. It was just really, really wonderful. How'd you know you were the one to write it?
Well, the answer to that is, I thought I might not be the one to write it alone. So that's why I phoned. I happened to have a friend of a friend was Tom Billow, who writes these amazing novels, really steeped in Wales and Welsh history, and he had explored this sort of territory through novels and poetry. And I just thought I needed someone to collaborate with that knew that part of it. And I recognised that I didn't. And so I always remember calling Tom and saying, explaining the story. And sometimes when you tell people an idea they like, they go quiet, and you kind of, you're not sure if the quietness means what's he talking about, or whether okay, maybe this is good, and he had he went quiet in the way that, okay, I really like the sound of that. But the thing we keep laughing about is that I then kind of, when he said he would be interested, I was like, and look, you take years to write novels. This, we could, we can write a screenplay, and we could be making the film next year or in 2 years. And cut to 7 years later, when we're still trying to make he's published 2 more books.
Why did you open your mouth?
Exactly. But yeah, no, Tom was really important to this, and the way that the characters, the characters, he had a real sense of Philip Burton, who he was. And we just had fun, looking up, because it's quite fun to follow in the footsteps of Richard. He's just it feels like just an interesting character to explore, Richard Burton, and it feels like one for the, Tom, loves Wales and the Welsh, and it has turned out to be the case that, more Tom than me, but people, do really, he lives in Wales, and a lot of Welsh people have now seen the film and want to talk about it. So yeah, it's like finding, I mentioned it a bit before, but finding the collaborators that help unlock it. And then Ed Taufan, who I produced it a lot with, his dad actually worked at the BBC and knew Philip Burton. So when I told him the story, he'd heard of Philip, and that seemed to be a happy coincidence. And Ed really, was in as a Welsh producer, kind of a big fish in the Welsh pond. He was able to pull together some Welsh funding. And then Mark Evans, the director, is someone I knew because he went to film school, funny enough, with Michael Winterbottom and Andrew Eaton. And so I knew him more socially. And it just, it seemed to happen at the right time in the end, because Harry, if we'd have made it, I always think that if we'd have made it when we first had the idea or first wrote the script, Harry would have been like 9 years old.
Yeah.
So we
you had to give him time to
Harry.
ripen.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Waiting for Harry to ripen. And looking at it all, I'm very happy that it all came together. And now there's a lot of film and film ideas. You end up, I buy books. I'm sure you're the same. You buy things, you're researching things. And I've got them on, some of the bookshelves around this and in the house. And every time I think subliminally, even if you don't notice them, if it's something that you'd like to make and you haven't made, you walk past them and you're always thinking, bugger, I still haven't made that film. But now I've got this Richard Burton shelf of like all these biographies and different bits and bobs that I'm at peace with having actually made this film. Again, like it's on the shelf. It's not actually, I do have a DVD copy of it. But you know what I mean? It's now it's made, it's done. I can close that chapter to some extent.
Okay, well, that's sort of the follow-on question, right? Aspirationally speaking, you've closed the book on that chapter. Have you also closed the book on a desire to write the things that you're producing? Was that an itch you needed to scratch?
I really want to open that book much more. I mean, look, the slight, because I worked as like a development producer for a lot of time, and it has to be said that a lot of the time you really fight to get money at the beginning of a project. And producers just don't get money, and the production companies don't really get much money. The person that gets the money is the writer, and whether it's made or not, you often this is a terrible thing to say probably on camera, but you're often like fighting to get the writer paid, which I'm always pleased about. I love writers, I love working with writers, and I'm not saying I would want to write everything that I want to do, but if there's something you fancy and then someone else writes it and you're not quite sure if it, when they're finally, because if they're a good writer, they're always busy. And so you get them the money, and then they eventually find the time, and then you get a draft, and you're like, it's good, it's good, but maybe I could have, if I'd have spent a couple of weeks, I could have got somewhere in the area of, look, writers who can really, really write, that's an amazing talent, and with the right project, the right writer is an amazing thing. I feel like I really have an eye for the story and the structure of it, and I don't feel like I could write everything. And like I'm working with a guy called Simon Woods, and his gift for dialogue is kind of Tarantino-esque, I would say. He's just got it in him to just mint, and it just pours out of him snappy dialogue after snappy dialogue, just pages and pages of the stuff. I would say I'm more of a shaper of stories. Working out the tangent, the tangent, which is important as well. It's things like just having that gift, that ear for dialogue is, it's something I may have a bit, but it's that's a gift that some writers really haven't. But so to answer the question, in a way, as a producer, it's very difficult unless you're already independently wealthy, which probably is the best way to start as being a producer.
Note to self. Hang on, let me write this down.
You need that time. You do need to pay the bills as you're developing something. So I love writing. I would like to do more of it. I'm not going to do everything, but I'm working on a horror. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about The Thing is I am working on a horror film at the moment, which is in the area of, and I just rewatched The Thing again recently, and it's kind of been on my mind because of that. So hopefully it's not the last thing I write, Mr. Burton. If it is, then I'm happy because it was a good one. But but I'm hoping to do more.
Well, I mean, I was totally blown away by Harry Lottie as Richard. Like, he was channeling the guy. It was phenomenal. And I'm like, I could see him step off this and just go right into like look back in anger or something, right? Like, there's just he carries that energy that Richard Burton has so often. As a kind of this producer and writer, I mean, were you much involved in the casting process for this, or did you guys kind of turn it all over to Mark Evans, your director?
Pretty much. I'd like to say yes, because Harry was such, I mean, there were times on set I just was so the whole film would not have worked without the person in that role doing a good job, and Harry did such an incredible job. So, but actually, Kelly Valentine, the casting director, Ed Taufan, and Mark Evans had a list of people they wanted to see. A lot of Welsh people, as you can imagine, and some other people of the right age. And Harry did a video read, which I did see actually. I was sent them all. But I think Mark really felt Harry, Mark then went and met Harry and just felt, this young man, this kid, had what it took. And, that was such a key. And I wasn't sure because he didn't really do the voice, but then Harry and I connected, and talking about the research and, different aspects of the script, and, had lots of nice chats. And then we were on WhatsApp together, and he started sending me, okay, I'm just working on the voice, but here's a clip of me doing, whichever, a bit of Shakespeare or something. And when I pushed play on that first clip, and I was like, I think this film might work. He had the voice. It was just amazing, really. I mean, I played it to Kate. One of the beautiful things about the film is we got to know the family, Kate Burton, and
I was going to ask if they'd seen it.
And I remember playing it to Kate too, as we must have been getting ready to film, or one day when Kate was kind enough to visit, and she had the same thing that's Dad. She really,
wow.
it was almost indistinguishable, and that's quite interesting because Harry, and to give him even more credit, what was very impressive is because of the nature of our shooting schedule, there were some days where he would have to be the kind of schoolboy in his shorts, and Harry really does try and plot the trajectory of it, and actually friend, I remember an actor friend that saw it said when the film started, I just wasn't sure if he was going to get to the Burton thing, and Harry really skillfully demarcates Richie Jenkins from then Richard Burton, and they're completely different, feel like different characters, this and time has elapsed, and some days Harry would have to start as one and move on to the other, and he really put the work in and has the talent and the ear, in a way it's a musical thing is to be able to imitate like that, but not only imitate, to really make you believe this is a three-dimensional person. Right. So, and then there were some times where we had to bring things forward, like the scene with Shakespeare. It's quite a moving scene where they're in front of Shakespeare's grave. We were supposed to film that in Stratford, kind of towards the back end of the movie, and it's a really emotional thing where he comes in and Philip
Mr. Burton's sitting there,
yeah, exactly. That scene, we had to spring that on Harry. We were like, look, we don't think we can afford to go to Stratford. We found a church at the end of Cardiff High Street. That funnily enough, was just a really good match. It was extraordinary, really. But we had to bring it forward by about 2-3 weeks. We're going to have to do it in a couple of days. I remember sitting him down and telling him, and he was like, okay, right. And I have to say, but his work in that, I think everyone was in tears watching him do that particular bit of it. And it was just, and earlier in the day, he'd probably been in like a pair of rugby shorts and running around a pitch. He just, as a school kid, he just really nailed it. And Philip, sorry.
Well, I just, just a shout out to his. I was surprised that he wasn't a local Swansea kid. Like that he's an Oxford kid having to learn Wales to be a presentable youth from this part of the country, even though they're hours apart. he represents a bit of local that I was very surprised to see.
Yeah, shout out to William Conacher, his dialect coach, who we've had on the show before.
Yeah, we have.
Yes, I saw that actually. And funny enough, I need to call. I actually got it on my list to call him about something, another film I'm working on. But I've got some things to do with. But yeah, they did an amazing job. But Harry has the capacity to. He's got a great ear. I think his dad was in an RAF engineer or something. Anyway, they moved around a bit. And I think Harry just was kind of I think I'm not mistaken, thinking Harry as a kid moved around country a bit. And you know what it's like it's the same in America, but in England, it's particularly like you only need to travel an hour and it's a completely different dialect. And he just is one of those people that was good at, thankfully for us, that just has that ear of and that sensitivity to and the depth of the voice as well, because it's a low voice, but he's kind of an interesting mixture actually, because it's kind of a deep voice, but it's got this crackle on the top. It kind of is and he did probably smoke 30 cigarettes a day. That feels like that's in there, it kind of he seemed to just embody it all. And look, some Welsh people were probably a bit put out that it wasn't a Welsh kid playing Richie Jenkins, but you'd either have to go for a Welsh person that went to the English Richard Burton, or like we did, Harry we knew could do the English Shakespearean side, and work back to the Welsh thing. But it was a lot of work for him, and kudos to him.
No kidding. Well, it is streaming now, so everybody, you should check it out. It is well worth it. Let's take this opportunity, though, to switch and start talking about John Carpenter and his 1982 flop, The Thing.
I actually love that you picked this movie, because I sort of feel like it is the horror Mr. Burton, like in the spirit of we can't trust what's left of Richie Jenkins in Richard Burton. It's like, we can't trust because it's aliens are taking over his body. It's the same movie, really.
Yeah, that's true. There is, it's interesting. It can be seen. It's one of those films that can be seen as a kind of paranoid, thing where people stop trusting each other. I think John Carpenter, because obviously thinking about doing this podcast, I've listened to a few things about The Thing, and John Carpenter's, he mentioned it a few years ago that we're becoming more divided. Quite a long time ago, it was probably 20 years ago, we're becoming very divided as people, not sure who you can trust, even within families and countries, and these group of people start to have to mistrust each other, and it does feel like, unfortunately, things haven't got better since John Carpenter said that 20 years ago. It feels like it's right. But really, The Thing. I want to describe where I first watched this film. And you'll understand
please.
I suggested it to you guys. I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. We were away as a family in Europe somewhere, I think Greece. And you know what it's like when you're in a kind of resort hotel, there's entertainment of various kind. And I suppose, I can't remember too much about the holiday, but what I do remember is one night, one hot Greek night, there was an outdoor cinema of some kind. It felt big to me, like a kind of amphitheatre-y, like not huge, but it was a kind of outdoor setting, a cool place to watch a film actually.
Yeah,
at
right.
nighttime. And it must have been. I was born in '77, so you know what it's like in those sorts of things. They don't show the film that has just come out. They'll show something that probably had been out for a couple of years, and they were able to show it or had a print of it or whatever. And so I was 7 or 8 years old. And they played The Thing, and I suppose my parents didn't really, it just was something that was going on at night, and as it was summer, I didn't have to get up in the morning, and I was just kicking around. I sort of remember being low down in the seats, kind of looking through, kind of people's legs almost at the screen, and I don't remember too much about the whole film, but what I do remember is the sequence of the defibrillator sequence.
Oh yes.
And then when the head comes off, and then it comes on the thing, and then grows eight legs and eyes and scuttles off under the table. And I think as a kid, that had a kind of pretty profound effect on me. It kind of blew my mind, and it remained blown. And really, I suppose I if any moment made me love cinema, maybe it was kind of that one, because I just then got really into it. Probably because it scared me. I mean, actually, I don't know if you've seen The Fabelmans,
Yeah, Spielberg.
the Spielberg film.
Absolutely.
There is that lovely sequence where he's trying to understand his fear, isn't he? I think a lot of filmmakers maybe have that. It's like, okay, this is a trick. This is a magic trick. This is an illusion. How does it work? Why has this scared me so much? Why did it have this effect on me? In order to conquer their fear. So in The Fabelmans, you have, not to compare myself with Steven Spielberg, by the way, I should say. I'm not comparing but I understood where that was from. Like, he had just seen the big train crash on the cinema, and he had his train set, and he had his camera, and he tried to pick it apart. And maybe not. I mean, between the ages of like 10 to 13, I'd watched more horror films, and then I just wanted to get into special effects. And part of understanding how a special effect works, it teaches you the grammar of filmmaking, doesn't it? It teaches you that there is a camera, number one, and that you can cut and move the camera around, and there are things the camera can't see, that people with syringes full of blood like pumping it away, or like just how to sell essentially a magic trick, and make it feel real on set, and the way you light it, and I suppose and Tom Savini, who I think I mentioned a bit before, had this book Grand Illusions that really showed his effects, and there are other movies, like The Thing, that I love, like I mentioned, like American Werewolf in London, that transformation scene. Day of the Dead, I particularly like Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead and all of those things, and Evil Dead 2, a clutch of just amazing, I would just say they're amazing films. They're just films, they're not horror films, they're just brilliant movies, and that helped me, even though I didn't know anyone in film and no way of really learning it. And also there wasn't YouTube, obviously. These days you can see so much behind the scenes stuff, and there wasn't even particularly behind the scenes, DVDs hadn't come out, so you would just have to glean these ideas of how you might make a film. And so The Thing, I still think it is the gold standard of practical effects, and it just coincidentally, it's still, I don't think it's been topped, and then as an, the best films, they're rewatchable, aren't they? And we, I have watched that film a number of times with a number of different people. Most recently, a few weeks ago, with someone that hadn't seen it, and you just enjoy different things in it and can appreciate it. As an adult, that I appreciate what we were talking about before, the distrust of this group of people, this ensemble, actors working together, feeling like real people, and the way that the situation unfolds they're in. But as a kid, burnt on my retina were those amazing effects by Rob Bottin.
That's, for me, that was exactly the same kind of how I fell in love with this movie. It was like I was on a trip with my dad, and we were in a hotel room, and there was and my dad thought I was asleep. It was late at night. He was just up, and he was watching TV, watching like HBO at the hotel, and it happened to be on, and I happened to actually be awake, and I was just kind of watching it, across my pillow, so my dad couldn't see me. And I mean, it terrified me. And that scene of the defibrillator with Richard Dysart getting his hands bit off, like, it's been burned into my brain since then. And it's just like I immediately fell in love with this, and it's always been one of my favorites. So it's fantastic effects, the way that Rob Bottin pulls all of this stuff off.
I think Rob's work is exemplary, of course, but I think one of the things that makes the thing work, and I think when you talk about it as an example of just a great film, is that the setup for this thing is already terrifying, right? Like, they put us in a location that is terrifying. They put us in a location where the elements alone can kill us. And then they tell you that the central horror is that the monster looks exactly like you, right? It's identical to everyone around you. So you almost don't need the glorious effects to create an atmosphere of absolute terror. And I think that's one of the things that the movie really, the story, I'll say too, because I think the original novella, I think, really captures that spirit. What they bring to screen is captures anxiety in a way that is really special.
Well, and what's funny about
I-
that is like
yeah.
being based on not only who goes there, the short story, but also the thing from another world in the 50s. Like this one almost carries more of that 50s like fear of communism, fear of the other
Yeah.
than even that one does, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, completely. And I hadn't read the short story. I thought, and I just happened to, again, just in the last few days, I just thought, oh, yeah, I'm going to read the story, and a lot of it is in there, even down to the blood testing scene. But you're right. It is just about the pace of the film. I absolutely adore. It draws you in. It doesn't patronize you. That is really important. It does never patronizes the audience. It is a grown-up, cerebral, well-told horror film that takes its time. And when the effects come, it's just kind of, they're explosive, but they don't ever feel gratuitous. They feel like, probably the only gratuitous thing in the movie is the commando role that Kurt Russell does at one point towards the end, where he's trying to, I don't know if you remember that, but there's a really kind of B-movie, like the stuff Chuck Norris, like, I'm going to do my role here, but no, the pace of the movie, it's all about the pace of the movie. And obviously as a 7-year-old, maybe I did appreciate it. Maybe this was like, I can't remember that aspect of it. But and also it just takes you somewhere, doesn't it? It's completely transporting. And the ice, the snowy tundra, and then the flamethrowers, these different textures they have, and just the vibe of the people. I mean, look, as a musician, I absolutely now love Stevie Wonder. I'd never noticed really until I watched it quite recently that Superstition is on,
right.
when he's roller skating around them.
Yeah.
I love that. I remember the first time I feel like I heard that song, I had the same effect on me of the clav playing. Anyway, it just is the most wonderfully rendered film. And look, that's probably why, as a mass market film, I mean, the Alien has it. Alien, the original, has it too. It has this slowness to it, and then these water cooler moments that that people just can't believe. Still talking about those effects. American Werewolf, of course, has it with the transformation scene. And I think you're right. Effects need to be embedded in good filmmaking. And they were just extraordinary. So it wasn't just, though as a child it was somewhat to do with the effects. I appreciated that it was a film by a proper filmmaker. A powerful filmmaker, and with a great cast. I'm sorry about that. Great cast that just that was a really English doorbell, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah,
Thorough.
It's just a great paced film by a real filmmaker that's taking his time, that really probably had to fight for a lot of things in this movie to be a certain way. And the ending too. And again, in my research about thinking about this film for this podcast, not to jump too much to the end, but just to say that they obviously tested it. It didn't test well, but it is the right ending for the film. And obviously fights would have had to make this a proper filmmaker's film. It's not a horror film. It's a grown-up, cinema lovers film.
Well, and look at the cast and the way, it's not just the cast, it's the way that they wrote those characters. Like, you believe all of them. They feel like actual people working down here on this base down in Antarctica doing research, and they all play it well, and you can see all their different roles and just how they all fit together, and then the way that the dynamic is as they start interacting and I'm not trusting you now because you're acting a little suspicious. Let's lock Wilford Brimley up out in the storage shed. Like, there's a lot of that sort of the way that they are reacting. And I think that's an important element that not only the screenwriters capture, but also I think John Carpenter knew how to actually direct that and shoot it in ways where he's putting certain characters together in frame or isolating someone in a frame by themselves. And I think that's just, you really have to know the story and how it's going to come together and unfold in order for that to work well, especially when it needs to be something that's going to scare an audience.
Yeah, and in order you need to care about the characters in order to, so when they are when they or do variously die, you kind of feel something. They're not just throwaway characters; they feel dimensional, and it does sound like they had that time. We had just to go back to Mr. Burton. We had a few days to really talk about the script with It was Mark and Tom and I, and then Harry and Toby Jones. And, you know, we really talked about every aspect of the, you know, talked through each scene and the dynamics, and had a bit of time, just a week or so before filming, to just refine it. And it feels like they did have that workshop that thing and develop these relationships with each other. You know, the actors really bring something to it, and they really had a sense of who their characters were. Funnily enough, like I say, I just read the novella, and, you know, a lot of those characters are to some extent in there. There's a sense of them in there, and their names are in there. And you know, it's kind of quite. I haven't watched the 50s one recently, and I'll be interested to actually go back and rewatch it. And presumably, the 1950s one had the effect on John Carpenter or Rob Bottin or whatever that the thing had on me as a kid. You know, it must have stuck in their minds. But yeah, a lot of it is about this camaraderie of the characters. It reminded me, I don't know if you've done Aliens on this show, or as I've mentioned Alien, but apparently with Aliens, you know, when they're all getting ready to go down to the planet, and they're all the sort of military team are all kind of together, and there's a dynamic between them. And apparently he shot that right at the end. He shot that at the end of them having been together, shooting everything else, because he knew the best way to show the camaraderie between these people that knew each other would be if they did genuinely know each other and had kind of inhabited their roles. And it feels like, although they might not, you know, you get so much of that in the thing, and it feels like it has stemmed from the characters, you know, the actors really helping feed into, you know, like just a proper collaboration, which is what you want in a film.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fascinating. I actually, that is one bit of trivia I did not know, and I think it's fascinating. You can totally see it in that film. This one, you know, it's got me thinking about The Mist, which I think the remake of The Mist, especially the black and white, is just extraordinary. And I think what I celebrate with that film is the same thing I celebrate with this film. That, you know, even though The Mist, the monster is not inside you. It is watching the destabilization of human relationships. And I think that's what we get here. And I think we get that from the 50s version too, right? We get this feeling that look at how fragile humanity is. If we're going to lock up a national treasure like Wilford Brimley, then we have fallen too far. We are irredeemable. And that is, I think, the biggest and most horrific lesson, is that we are deeply, deeply fragile human species. And it's one of the things that this movie, as a horror movie, does so well. I am curious your take on Carpenter writ large. Did you find that you started celebrating more broadly his catalog and the works of the great John?
Definitely. I always loved him as a filmmaker and as a musician, and you know, he just feels like he's a great, intelligent American filmmaker. And I haven't gone back for this. I probably should have done a John Carpenter season and really, you know, sort of tracked it. But he's you know, he has made quite a lot of varied, interesting films, you know, and even in the run up to this, you know, obviously he made Halloween, but then obviously did the Elvis film. That's kind of that's where he first did got the Kurt Russell. Was in that. You know, it's kind of interesting how he, you know, didn't necessarily do the obvious things. And then Assault on Precinct, I'd watched. I didn't love it as much as The Thing. You know, again, it's quite fun. You know, artist. You know, actor director collaboration. I remember Big Trouble in Little China. I remember it came out when I was a teenager, so that was probably the first one I watched actually in the cinema. And you know, it kind of, I quite like to watch it again now. It's quite a fun, patchy film. Probably they spent too much money on it. And They Live obviously has it's kind of blue pill, red pill stuff, isn't it? It feels like a film that is being and you know, probably there's a few dodgy commando roles in that film as well. Yeah, I mean, look, he's a great filmmaker and has worked on different budgets, you know, and just is rightly celebrated. I mean, look, I think probably I get the impression that people like us talking about The Thing, you know, 40 years later, might slightly annoy him because it wasn't here at the time. We're like, where were you at the time? It doesn't help me. Right. I think he probably does have that, thing of like, okay, so it's great in posterity, but it's like it's celebrating, someone that is, Van Gogh, but it didn't really help Van Gogh
Yeah,
much.
right.
Like he's not around to appreciate the.
Look, John,
Well, he
I was
made-
10
yeah.
years old. I was doing
Yeah.
my part, man. This is what we get.
That's right. Well, look, he made all of his money on this movie when he had the rights to the prequel made, right? Like that's
Yeah.
where he pulled
Right,
all
he
that
did.
extra
That's
money
true.
from.
Yeah, which I didn't go back and watch. I should watch. I
I'm
mean,
curious to
funny enough,
revisit it. It's
I just spent
don't
a lot of
remember
time
it
in
being
Norway.
great, but yeah.
I
Oh.
spent a lot of time in Norway, so I watched it when I watched the thing again recently. Oh right, actually I know Norwegians, and
Yeah,
you know,
right.
I kind of like the Norwegian aspect of it, which is something
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was in the 50s one. That's not in the
No,
Joseph Campbell.
no. 50s is just
stuff.
very
And
American.
Yeah, and the Norwegians, the idea that this has just happened to someone else and it's about to happen to you, you know, but you don't know it yet, and through this dog, and why are they trying to shoot the dog? It's just the film just leaves you wondering what is going to happen at every turn, and it takes and that dog is a brilliant, you know, brilliant
Great
part
dog
of the movie.
performance. Yeah.
Yeah, great dog performance, and then like you were saying about isolating them in the frame. You know, it feels like there's those lovely shots of the dog. You know, little do they know what this dog is carrying, and then the dog. Right. You know, the dog loving character, the dog handler. It just I like and what was great is that I tried to watch it on DVD with one of my kids, and I didn't know it was something interaction between the DVD and my TV. It just didn't look that great when I watched it a few years. It looked like an old film. But we streamed it the other day with a friend, you know, from one of the streaming platforms, which I won't mention it. But anyway, it was just looked so good. Yeah. It looked so sharp, so crisp, like it was made yesterday, you know, but a period piece. It really, apart from the commando role, but it looked like it could have been made yesterday. It just so beautifully filmed. And, you know, a lot of, you know, there's this story of Rob Bottin wanting his, the effects to be not too, you know, keeping them in the dark, keeping them, you know, with sorts of lighting that didn't just reveal too much. All those choices they made with the lighting were just perfect ones in the film stock. And it just, you know, I just don't think, I do think it's one of the great, you know, like I say, one of the great films, definitely one of the greatest genre films, you know, not for everyone because it's slow. It doesn't have, you know, it asks questions. It doesn't answer them all, you know, but it is a wonderful piece.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to you figuring out how to integrate a commando role into your horror film that you're currently working on.
Yeah, that's canon now, right?
You have to do that. You need to be like, how can that work? There's got to be a way.
Yeah. It's Josh Hyams' signature producer role is to make sure a commando role is somewhere in everything
somewhere
you
in
do.
the project.
I feel like I'm getting to that age where like it feels like everyone could do a commando role, but actually I'm thinking, could I now just go out and do a commando? I'd be slightly worried about do something.
Yeah, right.
I feel it the next day. I think I'd feel it the next day.
No kidding. I want to wrap this up, but before I do, I just considering your love of music and everything, and we've talked a lot about John Carpenter. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention Ennio Morricone and the fact that he did the score for this and captured like perfectly a John Carpenter essence score. Yeah. I'm just curious how the score works for you because it feels very different from so many. I mean, so many of his scores feel different, but this one in particular.
Yeah, for Morricone, I mean, it's interesting it's Morricone because it could be John Carpenter. So it feels like it must have been some like, you know, meeting where John Carpenter was like, how about you if you do what you do, but you do it with, you know, this instrument, you know, because
we're all aware that John Carpenter had his fingers wrapped around Morricone's neck during composition, right?
Yeah, but I just think it does work, you know. So apparently there's a lot of music that wasn't used, and you know, in this repetitive, drony, you know, kind of someone described it as it's a kind of isolated pulse, you know, that it reflects the isolation of the characters. Because it's quite bare, it is one note, and it is just feels like it is alone. And it just does drive through the film, and it is incredibly atmospheric. And I think Tarantino used some of the music. I was just reading about this on The Hateful Eight. Reused some of the music that wasn't used, you know, the unused music, and obviously Kurt Russell. I think, you know, I hadn't realized Tarantino liked this film. I suppose I imagine he might do because it's that age and again a video shop
junkie.
But you know, he he recognized in this film something that he reused with the Hateful Eight, definitely in terms of the music, but also in terms of this group of men having some issue, Reservoir Dogs being one, Hateful Eight being another.
Exactly,
but the music is a key part of it, and it places it in time. But I think post Stranger Things and Marty Supreme recently, I think that kind of synth-led soundtracks are kind of back in mode. And a lot of it is, you can see I've got a bunch of synth here that would be, unaffordable, when this film was made, but they're kind of replicas of the technology, and you can get it on plugins now, that these amazing synth sounds, which are very much of their age, still haven't quite been surpassed in the way that they can just work. They're synthetic, but they have, so love the music as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a great film. I'm so glad that you recommended it and gave us a chance to chat about it here on the show. Mr. Burton, out right now. Everybody should check that out and their streaming services. What else do you have in the works that people should know about right now, Josh?
Well, look, on Mr. Burton, thank you for mentioning that. I would absolutely love people to watch Mr. Burton. I guarantee you'll get something out of watching that film, and it will make you feel something about, how there might be some talent out there that could do with your help if you work in the industry, or just recognize something, that you like in it. I hope everyone does get a chance to watch it if you can, because it's hard to get films out on the cinema. So I really appreciate that it's coming out in the States, and it's tough to get films out these days, and I think people that like cinema will like Mr. Burton, I hope. But yeah, we've got another series of The Trip we shot last year in Norway.
This was the Norway trip.
Yeah,
the Norway trip, The Trip to the Northern Lights, we call it, and it's
nice.
Stephen Robb, slightly old. So The Trip comes out as a film in America that will be coming out probably towards the end of the year. And it comes out as a series. Actually, it's cut into a 6-episode series and a film, but the series comes out in the UK in October. And then I'm working on a film called The Worst with the writer I was talking about, Simon Woods, and quite a starry cast: Keira Knightley, Alicia Vikander, Jamie Dornan, Anna Maxwell Martin, hopefully Tom Hollander, people like that. I probably shouldn't mention too many names in case they. Erin Kellyman, who was in Scarlett Johansson's film recently, first film.
Oh, sure.
So we've got
Gosh, every one of those names transcends the title of that project.
Yeah.
Every one of them.
Yeah, because it's called The Worst. And so at the moment it's called The Worst. And that's some marketing people tell me it's a bad idea for a film. It's called The Worst. And actually someone that works like a casting person passed me on to an agent and said, "This is Josh Hyams, he's the worst producer," which I really liked, because the film is called The Worst, and we know what the T-shirt would be: the worst crew, the worst cast.
Right.
Yeah, and so. But at this point, I'm tickled by the name The Worst. But it's about the worst people having the worst weekend. They're away in France for the weekend, and it all goes horribly wrong. These old friends. So hopefully, we'll be shooting that in June in sunny France.
Lovely.
Not Norway. Wow. Quite different to.
Right. Time for some sun. That's great.
But thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invite. Andy, I worked with in Phoenix, and we really enjoyed working together. So lovely to see you. Thank you, Pete, as well.
Movies We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network and the Next Reel family of film podcasts. The music is Chong Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. Learn about becoming a member at thenextreel.com/membership. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time.